Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the SubQuery customer series, where we're talking to various customers that use and utilize SubQuery in their production applications. And today I'm joined by Simon Chadwick from Eclipse Finance. Simon and I are pretty close together in the world today, which is quite good. I'm in Singapore and Simon's in Bali, and it's great to talk to you finally and get you finally onto this call, Simon. We've been chasing you for a while.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It has been several months trying to get me on a podcast call, but finally made it. So awesome.
The surf's been really, really good in Bali, I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, dry season is typically the time of year where there's good waves, but I mean, there's a lot to do in the market, so that's kind of where most of the energy goes into the building at the moment. So yeah.
Well, Eclipse Finance has been very busy recently. So why don't you start off by telling us and the viewers a bit more about Eclipse Finance, what you guys do, what you operate on?
Yeah, Eclipse is interesting. I mean, I'll keep it brief because I can kind of ramble on for a long time about what we do. But the brief piece of it is we're looking to revolutionize the token launch space, and we're solving a few issues that we currently see in the token launch space. And when we kind of explain Eclipse Fi, you could call it a launch pad, but reality is we're trying to bring it into its own category and something greater than that, which is really what is the purpose of a token launch? A lot of times you see a lot of these IDO launch platforms and launch pads that have kind of gravitated towards really this token sale event, which is really about capital formation. It's about tokens performing and doing all-time high X's, and really about token pumps in a way, right? And that's kind of where that's gravitated towards. But we see it so much more than that. We see token launches as really a community bootstrapping event, the ability to bootstrap liquidity, but also to bootstrap users and align users for a protocol. So for us, that's really important. And so we really wanted to break that apart and go, how do we form communities around projects? How do we distribute tokens to communities, as opposed to just being a token launch event or a capital raise event, which is really about community, which is the core of crypto. So we, decided to build Eclipse Fi, which is a modular platform for different methods of token launch and distribution. So essentially, it's not just one IDO launchpad. It's a platform that enables projects to craft their multi-stage launches, including lock drops and liquid auctions and different things. And it may enable a perps dex to launch, distribute tokens to users that are aligned with the protocol, but also accrue value in the process. So rather than just, okay, cool, there's an IDO, we're going to launch the token at this specific price and raise a bunch of capital. So that's kind of the base block of what we want to do, is just bring sustainability to token launches, trust, and all this stuff, and kind of create a primitive that is the go-to place for launches. When you think of a trading giant, you think of Uniswap in terms of dexes. We kind of want to be that place where we are the go-to place for different types of token launches. On top of that, we are the first project to launch with fully integrated, fully decentralized ZK KYC. So it's anonymity providing KYC, so we can kind of follow compliance while also being, preserving people's anonymity. And we're really, really big UX Maxis. So we're going cross-chain. We're using, on one side, we're using general message passing to be able to go cross-chain while still retaining a native user experience for users that are already in crypto. And then we're using smart accounts to bring in normal users into crypto and abstract as much of the back-end complexities of blockchain as possible. So the future of Eclipse is it will look like this cross-chain platform that doesn't feel like blockchain, but that feels like Web 2, and will be the go-to place to participate in token launches. So I know that's a lot, but that gives you kind of a good idea of the mission and what we're working towards.
Yeah, well, token launches are quite an important aspect of any kind of crypto project. And for many of those listening to this, probably have never experienced or launched a token. What is the kind of the history of different token launch options you've had? I remember all the way back in the 2018 days where there were massive launches back then. How has the market changed, and how has token launch changed since then?
So, I mean, there used to be ICOs, and ICOs are a little bit different because they typically used to raise just off a white paper, right? There was a lot of scams, but typically it was, okay, we've got this white paper for this thing we want to create. There were no real VCs or seed rounds or pre-seed rounds or all this sort of stuff, right? It was community from day one. And then it evolved, through 2018, it evolved into coming in, IDO launchpads kind of picked up into this bull market. We had exchange launchpads, IDOs. Then we had IDOs. Typically, like these projects had raised money from pre-sale, or they'd raised money from VCs before, or sometimes they would come into market. Typically, they're a bit further along in their development process as well by the time they get to it. And essentially, like they were, raise money on these IDO launchpads. But like the price discovery for that wasn't always great, because it's the price is set by the, obviously price is set by the project or the launchpad. Wasn't always like fair distribution, hard to get into these launches, and also like price, it wasn't the greatest price discovery, because it would like, on launch it would like pump or do this sort of stuff. So then like kind of balance the LBPs became popular in certain circles across like ETH, Copper Launch, which is now Fjord Foundry. Different mechanisms of bootstrapping initial liquidity. So either raising capital or launching and distributing a token in different ways. So it kind of went down that route. And then it kind of like in Terra, we saw a lot of like evolving of different mechanisms for launches. This is what like really interested us. Like Delphi came up with the lock drop and LBA. There was Prism Forge, different types of fair launches. And now we're seeing a kind of a different phase of launches where we're seeing a lot of protocols or DEXs handling their own launches, or building their own launch mechanisms and playing around with it. But there still isn't like this central place for, if you like, I mean, we did also have airdrop phases as well. We've had the airdrop phase. It's still kind of in that, but we haven't really had this like, I guess, central protocol that's experimented heavily with different launch mechanisms and been the place that, like, when you think about like token launches, besides from Binance Launchpad or maybe CoinList, there is, obviously the decentralized launchpads like DAOmaker, but there's never this one place you think, this is the place where I want to go launch that's my token, So yeah, that's something we see. There's definitely like different camps. Like DeFi guys are more likely to launch their stuff in like an LBP or, an IDO within the ETH space. It's a little bit more separated. Kind of if you're gaming token or metaverse or social fi project, you're likely to go to one of the more kind of mainstream launch pads. If you're a bigger project, you're going to go to Binance or CoinList typically. So yeah, that's sort of with the landscape of launches.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of like changes that happen over time. And so looking today, right, like what especially in this more difficult market that we're seeing at the moment, what is kind of critical for a token launch? Like how do you need, what more do you need than just like a standard, IEO, IDO, or
Well, it's very hard. Like launching a token successfully, especially when the volume is low, is difficult, right? And I think it depends on the circles. It depends on your goals. It depends on the mechanisms for launches. Like if you launch a token, haven't raised some VCs, you distribute a token to the community in a really fair way, you're likely to get good price discovery, because you're kind of starting on floor. The community-wide distribution is important for like this crypto. I guess it's like this crypto native effect of having the community at the early stages. I think that's really important for protocols. Then if you really raise from VCs and you're kind of at the idea around, it's difficult because a lot of the launchpads now are very conscious that people don't want to participate in launches because the price has been very down. So they've brought in a lot of these like refund policies and things that make it very hard. Sexes do this as well. It makes it very hard for projects with their launch, because they have to have so many ducks in a row to make sure that the project's pumped. And this can go both ways, because it can actually lead to scams where projects are just putting a ton of money into buying bots and hype and all this sort of stuff just to look good and metrics so people buy into the project and it does well.
So these are contracts where if the token doesn't go up or doesn't stay above a certain price.
Yeah, typically their contracts with launchpads, it's like if you go below IDO price within X, then you refund to the community, and the community likes this stuff, but I think it's really bad for projects. It's really bad for the space, and I'd actually question the legalities of these refund policies. I've seen some worse ones. I mean, I can't mention who, but I've seen ones that are like 5x, price performance, like targets and stuff, and it's like, it's not really the industry that we want to play in. It's not really the space that we want to play in, because it's not really like, I don't think that's, good quality projects are likely not going to take that, right? And so then you're launching projects that kind of have desperation or stuff, and so you're not actually getting the right projects that are going to be long-term successful. You're just chasing pump and dump. So yeah, there's intricacies to it. It's tough. Like you got to really line up for a good successful launch, right? You got to think of like, okay, if you're doing an IDO, you're probably raising a certain amount of capital. like in that, or you're selling a certain number of tokens, I should say. So you kind of got to fill that out. And then when your token launches, if you raise on normal IDO pads, typically those communities are very flip mentality or mercenary. So they're going to sell that token, like what they have unlocked. Then you may have some VCs, you may have some like sell pressure. So you need enough like hype and buy pressure to absorb that on the open market. Otherwise your token is going to do this. So there's a lot of like preparation work around like marketing and PR and exposure and KOLs and all this stuff that has to go in place for a successful token launch. Especially a lot of projects we see don't have like staking in place from day one, or their projects, they're like, maybe their application isn't ready from day one. And so you get this kind of weird dynamics where a lot of the charts end up looking like this because they launch a token, there's a lot of hype, and then they've kind of got the wrong users bootstrap because it's kind of a lot of the guys are there to flip. So we do see that as definitely being issues, but there's a lot of work that needs to go into successful token launch because there's just a lot of prep work on many fronts, sexes.
And you mentioned before, like when you said one of the main thing is to build a community, right? That's kind of a main indicator of success for a token launch is a good community. This mythical good community that aren't people that are just trying to flip the token for a quick return. Where do you find them from? How do you build them?
Yeah, so it's difficult in this market because there's a lot of PvP happening. So I'll say like, this is probably one of the issues. Like, I mean, a lot of the launch pads won't accept projects that don't have existing communities, which is kind of funny because the idea is to bootstrap a community, but they want to like have the hype existing so that happens. But it depends on the kind of project that you are. Like, I mean, now we're seeing a lot of like Zealy stuff and airdrop hunters and kind of that phase of things, which isn't like we've gone through this ourselves, right, with the community, and it's a difficult place because it builds a lot of numbers and there's a lot of like vanity metrics, but it's not necessarily conducive to like, okay, you got a lot of mind share, right? But it can also like in its own create like effects. Like we see this with like injective and stuff. Like for a while it's quite an airdroppy hunty more community, but now it's got a lot of strength and everybody's talking about it. So it can lead to things. I think like, with building community, it's like obviously having good influential KOLs is important, but ideally you have them as like long-term aligned people. They're not paid shillers. But I mean, there's a difference. There's very different tiers of KOLs as well, right? Because you got KOLs that are very much like airdrop hunters or promote this or promote that. And you got like the mindshare DeFi threaders, the guys that are very like thoughtful. They create really good content. They have newsletters. They really attract users that really like delve into making things better. So I think like the avenue is trying to align in different ways, trying to network and align with people that are, have a lot of mind share to attract that quality community. But it depends on the type of dApp as well that you have. If you've got a DeFi protocol, you're likely wanting, you want more of those like DeFi degens. And you may have an app that's doing NFTs that's going to be a completely different community. So yeah, there's a few ways of doing it. It's not easy for sure. But yeah.
One thing you mentioned at the start of this call, which I really liked, was that you described Eclipse Finance as UX Maxis, which is a great term that I'm going to steal from here on out. Tell me about that. Like, so why are you UX Maxi, and how does that manifest itself in your application you're building?
Well, because the UI in crypto at the moment sucks. Like, it's just. I mean, within the team, we have like three of the exec team have like backgrounds in UX and Web 2 stuff, like around that. So we're very, I guess, tuned into like communication with people that aren't already in crypto and flows and like just really being able to break it down. So for us, I look at like even the experience of wallets and token approvals and changing chains and onboarding. Like, I mean, remember in the bull market when I was helping my friends get into crypto, I'm like, there's no way anyone outside of the fact that they're making a hell of a lot of money, there's no way that this is going to create adoption in any sense or form. Like, people are inherently lazy. Like, it's just the way it goes. Uber, everything works. Like, Uber works because it saves people time and money. Airbnb works, saves people time and money, like convenience. Like, it's all about like convenience. And I mean, there's other reasons for it, but there's a lot of the things that we now know are linked down to making things easier and being more instant. So if we expect people to come into something where they're actually going backwards in time, they're not going to do it. So for us at Eclipse, there's a few stages of it, right? Because if we built the best abstracted app right now, there's no retail coming into the market just yet. So it's kind of pointless. But so we see stage one as being, okay, how do we improve the UX for existing users, right? Users that are in crypto that are a little bit more technical. They're okay with the hurdles, but there's still friction, and they're not going to go and set up a nano wallet on a new chain. Like if you set up a new chain that has its own wallet, who's going to come and set it up? Like you need activation, right? So you want to like almost bring it to them as opposed to force people to come over if you want to adopt users. So with Eclipse, like this is where general message passing comes in massively. For us to be able to deploy natively on ETH and different chains and have that participation from ETH come from a native chain. So we, our home base on Neutron, deploying on Linear, a couple other L2s, and we'll expand from that by using general message passing so that when you interact with the dApp from Linear, for example, it's the same wallet that you're used to using. It feels like a native application on Linear, but the execution's happening on either the bridge or on top of Neutron, right? So that's stage one. Like it's like we want to be multi-chain. There's still obviously some stuff happening there, but it makes that experience easier. And I mentioned phase two, which is like smart accounts and account abstraction. That's a difficult problem to solve in a few fronts, but essentially like the idea is to have like a smart account that's able to sign transactions on multiple chains, able to control a lot of stuff, seedless onboarding. And that's where you start to abstract away some of the layers. Like USDC should be USDC, right? It shouldn't be like USDC Solanus or USDC this, right? If you've got the ability to control that, like that should be abstracted as much as possible into the back end. And the user should be depositing USDC like a centralized exchange. So that's kind of our long-term goal, is to just have that experience, which is like sign up with a social wallet, deposit through like Cardo, for example, on on-ramp, off-ramp, like fund your account with USDC, withdraw from a SEX, etc. But it doesn't, like the user doesn't need to know that you're using, Arbitrum or Polygon, all this and stuff, right? But it's about the choice, because you need the degens are going to want more customizability and options and choice, but then the newer user is going to need that like simplified version that feels like a Web2 application.
It's a classic challenge of designing for your users, when your users is, the level of understanding and knowledge of your users is quite a wide range.
There's a few problems to solve. It's not just the UX with the launch platforms. Is a lot of it's around trading, which is hard to solve. Everybody's trying to solve this cross-chain trading. The issue with a token launch is the launch platforms, we can do this pretty easily. Like we can make this experience happen, but the trading after the launch, like straight as the token's listed, that's more difficult, because you need the volume and you need the volume that comes from multiple chains, right? Instantly. And when you're using bridge and stuff, there's finality issues. And that's where things get a little bit more complex, because any finality there is detrimental. So, yeah.
Sounds like a nightmare. One thing you did mention, though, is, you mentioned your home chain's Neutron, and you're working on Linear, and you've also mentioned Polygon and a few others. So, you do work on multi-chains, right? You've been kind of quite vocal in terms of making sure Eclipse works nicely with many different Cosmos zones, but also many different layer 2s.
We haven't announced it. We got a lot of layer 2s that we haven't yet announced. There's a few coming for sure. We don't want to go too multi-chain. So, our experience as much as possible is like we want to work vertically, which is working closely with foundations. We don't want to just spray and pray and launch random applications across 30 chains. It's not like, but eventually we'll be across pretty much everything. It's kind of like it doesn't matter which chain you're on. Right? That's the end goal, of course, but. Yeah.
I promise you at SubQuery we support 109 different chains, and I promise you that working across that number of chains is a pain in the ass.
I bet.
It's great, but every time it's a mental context switch around the different language, the terminology of each different network. But it is kind of interesting that you do have that mindset of having that balance between meeting your customers where they want to be and where they are, but also not spreading your eggs too thin.
Yeah, for sure. It's optionality, right? But you kind of, I'm a believer in working vertically as opposed to horizontally. Like you expand, but like not as a substitute for creating real value, which I think a lot of people do. Is like, we're going to split across. You don't see some of these projects that are multi-chain. They're successful projects spread until they've achieved product market fit where it makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not going across 50 chains when they don't have traction on one chain, which is
It's
really
not a
like,
solution. Right.
Yeah, it doesn't solve your issues, right? You want users and traction win in a couple of these hubs. Like we're already going multi-chain because it makes sense to tap into more of the deal flow and have some of the ETH experience, and also have like communities from multiple chains. But we're not going to go set up on 30 chains without the product market fit and without like you know, an established position. Otherwise, it's just a waste.
It's fair enough. And then how is SubQuery helping you on this journey of yours?
Yeah, so for us, like SubQuery really enables us to it does enable us to deploy quicker. Especially like it's been an interesting journey, like on Cosmos that hasn't had a lot of that infrastructure. It just enables us to kind of have everything there when we're like deploying on a new Cosmos chain, like deploying on Neutron. Not having SubQuery there is you know, definitely important for us in terms of being able to like, you know, query our data and everything and have everything ready to go. So yeah, it's just been really good to kind of set up that, have that infrastructure set up, and and be able to deal with like that expansion side of things.
And hopefully help you provide a better experience to your users in the front end, of course, which
for
sounds
sure.
like that's a
Which is
cornerstone
everything for us, right? We just want to be able to have you know, graphs, and we want to be able to have like be able to showcase like the information that the user wants to experience and know about. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and for sure that's important to us.
How frustrating is it sometimes when you have your designer hat on and you go and draw this amazing mock-up and you go to a developer and they're like, oh, it doesn't quite work that way in the smart contracts.
Yeah, that's a big friction point for me, because I'm like, you know, I'm not a coder myself, right? Like I'm very much on the business side, marketing side, design side, right? And so my thought process of like turn this into reality is very different from a dev's, which is like, oh, this looks pretty. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. And sometimes it's way too overblown. And then the developer tells you that it's going to take ages. And you're like, can you do it faster? Like, just make it happen. You know what I mean? It's like, it's always this juggle of like being able to take this like vision of UX. Like I think of it in my head, I'm like, okay, this is the flows, this is how it works and everything. But I don't always have that same connection between like my mind and how long it takes versus how long it actually takes to create in reality.
And weird and wonderful constraints on smart contracts that is sometimes hard to realize when you're not living in that world every day. But I completely get the point.
Yeah, for sure.
I have the same issues myself. Simon, my last question before we finish. If you were to look back to yourself 3 years ago before you entered the space, before you started working on Eclipse Finance, and you were to give yourself or someone else new to the space some advice, what would that advice be?
I mean, I've been in the space since 2016 now, so I've been through a few cycles.
You're an old timer.
Definitely. I mean, that's not that old. I mean, there's definitely some more OGs, but I've been through
young and fresh for.
Well, I feel like I'm 100 inside, right? I've been through the Terra collapse and FTX, and like I've been through all that stuff before, but I've been building since, you know, it started like Terra, and just, you know, it's been a run. But I think like it's sticking it out. I think that's a really big piece of advice. It's like, don't get overly emotional. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Know when to really when the market's overhyped, and know when to kind of remove yourself from that emotion. I think it's huge. But on the other side is the control of your emotions allows you to see opportunities. Like even recently, like the market, you know, was very clearly similar to 2019, where there's so much apathy, there's so much negativity. Just like it's a good time to start it was a good time to start deploying, right? And so I think like thinking in cycles and thinking of like good times are going to end and bad times are going to end, right? And then learning this through the cycles really helps you like position in crypto, in blockchain. I think, you know, the other piece of advice is learn as much as you can, make mistakes, add value. I think adding value is everything. If you just become an absolute workhorse that adds value to everyone around you, has a really high work ethic, is, you know, willing to take ownership of things, you'll go so far, because you can then build a very strong network. You'll come in, you add value to protocols. You may even get a job as in a protocol if you're adding a ton of value. If you're adding value to people, you can build your own community, maybe influence as a YouTuber or a KOL. Building up your network leads to like opportunities, which leads to like being able to start your own DApp applications, or fitting in within the venture capital space, all this sort of stuff. So there's actually so many opportunities, and many people don't think that they're qualified for, or they're like, I don't know enough, I'm not a dev. Like, that stuff doesn't, like, obviously you'll learn over time, but just get in there, learn, add value. I think that stuff gets you so far, and you can actually propel to great heights. And don't wait, right? Start straight away, because right now, even though the market's looking better, like, there's going to be a couple of years of good times, and you want to position in front of it and be one of those OGs. So yeah, that's my advice.
Wise words spoken from an old timer. Thank you very much, Simon, for joining us this today, and I very much appreciate the chance to talk to you about these different topics.
Yeah, man. Always fun. Always love a good yarn, as Australians would say.
Cheers, man. And thank you very much for joining. Bye, guys.